The South has produced some of America's most resilient, creative, and unstoppable icons. Today, we take a look at America's first black millionaire, Louisiana's own Madam C.J. Walker. Born Sarah Breedlove in 1867, she was a part of the first generation of black Southerners to be born post-slavery, which had ended just 2 years prior. However, the stench and residue of slavery would remain and affect Sarah for her entire life. America's unpaid labor practices may have ended, but the post-Reconstruction era still only offered mostly back-breaking manual labor for the African Americans who stayed in the South. Sarah toiled on the same plantation where her parents were once enslaved. Orphaned at 7 years old, Sarah took on the back-breaking tasks of manual laborer and laundress. Facing unrelenting discrimination and poverty, at just 14 years old, Sarah began to lay down her roots when she married Moses McWilliams. At 18, she gave birth to her only child, Lelia, but just 2 years later, she faced uncertainty again when her husband died. The genesis of an empire. In search of change, Sarah and her daughter moved to St. Louis to join her 4 brothers who had established themselves as barbers. During this time, she began to suffer from scalp ailment that caused her to lose her hair. Hair loss was a major concern for black women in the early 1900s due to harsh working conditions and the lack of suitable hair care products. Frustrated by the ineffectiveness of available options, she began experimenting with her own concoctions in her kitchen. Then, in 1905, after marrying her 3rd husband, Charles Joseph Walker, and moving further west to Denver, Colorado, Sarah finally developed her own solution to her hair troubles and wanted to share it with the world. If you're still following this amazing story, click the subscribe button below. Now, let's see what happened next. Sarah changed her name to Madam C.J. Walker and struck out on her own. She packed up her magical formula and hit the road. The first stop in her entrepreneurial journey would take her back to the hostile and dangerous South. The South knew Sarah Breedlove the sharecropper, but they were about to meet Madam C.J. Walker and her wonderful hair-growing formula. Mrs. Walker went door to door, demonstrating her hair formula in homes and churches, perfecting her sales and marketing strategy along the way, coining the phrase, "I got my start by giving myself a start." Madam Walker's wonderful hair grower was a scalp conditioning and healing formula. Her system included a shampoo, pomade, and required strenuous brushing and iron comb presses to the hair. She claimed her formula turned brittle hair into luxurious, healthy hair. Her formula went through the black community like the Holy Ghost and ended up requiring more than she could provide on her own. Guided by her husband, Mrs. Walker learned that in order to really grow the business, she had to grow her sales capabilities. So back home in Denver, her daughter, now known as Lelia Walker, was put in charge of mail-in orders. While on the road, Madam Walker recruited a vast sales force of over 40,000 women, many of whom were like her, black and struggling to make ends meet. In 1908, Madam Walker started to lay the groundwork for her own training grounds. She eventually opened the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company in Indianapolis. Here, she trained her sales force, held her own research and development of products, and opened a hair and nail salon. Her factory became a hub of black female entrepreneurship, employing hundreds of women and offering them financial independence, along with being the largest inland manufacturing center in the nation. Mrs. Walker was officially one of the biggest names in America. She had become a staple product in black women's homes all across the country and employed even more. So rightfully, her next move was to take her products to the rest of the world. In 1913, she deployed some of her sales force to travel to the Caribbean and Central America to spread the gospel of her products, engaging in the same tactics, going door to door in countries like Cuba, Haiti, and Costa Rica. Beyond business, philanthropy, and activism. There's no doubt Madam C.J. Walker enjoyed the fruits of her labor. She eventually left the day-to-day operations in Indianapolis and oversaw them from a fabulous brownstone in Harlem. She quickly became a fixture of the early days of the Harlem Renaissance, which epitomized black excellence, art, music, and fashion. On any given day, you could catch one of the richest people of her time, riding around in her Ford Model T, rocking a fur, and draped in jewelry. However, Madam Walker's success was not solely measured in diamonds and pearls. As her bank account blossomed and her notoriety grew, she used her power to enact change. She helped establish a YMCA in the black community of Indianapolis by donating $1,000, the equivalent of almost $26,000 today. She contributed to various scholarship funds and was a supporter of local black artists. Mrs. Walker also did not back down from letting her power be felt in the political realm. In July 1917, when a white mob murdered more than 36 blacks in East St. Louis, Illinois, Mrs. Walker joined a group of Harlem leaders who visited the White House to present a petition advocating federal anti-lynching legislation. She was hand in hand with the likes of W.E.B. Du Bois, Marilyn McLeod Bethune, and Booker T. Washington. An uneducated laundress from the cotton fields of Louisiana was having conversations with the most powerful man in the country in order to make things better for generations to come. At a convention that same year, she stood in front of a packed audience in Philadelphia and said, "This is the greatest country under the sun, but we must not let our love of country, our patriotic loyalty, cause us to abate one whit in our protest against wrong and injustice. We should protest until the American sense of justice is so aroused that such affairs as the East St. Louis riot be forever impossible." At the end of that tumultuous year, Madam Walker retired to her final home in Irvington, New York. Villa Lawaro was designed by the first black licensed architect in New York City, Verdner Tandy, and cost $250,000. That's $6.3 million today. Her vision was for Villa Lawaro to be a haven for black artists, intellectuals, and activists. A gathering place for dreamers and community leaders to come together and inspire. Madam C.J. Walker died on May 25, 1919, of kidney failure. Right before her death, she donated the equivalent of $128,000 in today's money to the NAACP's anti-lynching fund. She also bequeathed hundreds of thousands of dollars to various orphanages and individuals. In her will, Madam Walker even dedicated 2/3 of her company's future profits to charities. After her death, Alelia Walker became president of her mother's company, leading it to even greater heights and becoming a force beyond America's borders. Madam C.J. Walker shattered stereotypes, paved the way for generations of black entrepreneurs, and redefined the very meaning of success for black women. Her story is not just about hair care. It's about resilience, self-determination, and the power of community. Today, her spirit lives on in the countless black women who continue to break barriers and build empires, proving that excellence has no color. Let Madam C.J. Walker's story inspire us all. Let us celebrate black excellence in all its forms. Let us support black businesses, and let us continue to break down the barriers that hold us back. Let us live by her famous quote, "I got my start by giving myself a star."